Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Does any member have any declaration of interest he or she wishes to declare? No, that's fine, thank you. Could you please approve the minutes of the last meeting, which was on the 18th of June?
I move those, Chair.
Thank you. First, planning application 24/0247 for the variation of planning permission on land to the north-east of St Thomas Church, Wheatley Lane Road, Barrowford. You want to speak?
Maybe Neil, could you please highlight the changes for us?
Yes, Chairman. Changes are 4 less units. The changes are really slight changes around the top there. The road before it came in there and went up, and there's some units in there. But effectively, it's the same format going up there. Attenuation pond in the middle of the or underneath the car parking area. And the main changes really are, there are changes in house types, but the main, shall we say, more controversial bits are around this section here and in relation to that property and this existing house there with the garage. So they seem to be, obviously local members may have different views, but they seem to the main areas of concern. If I just show a couple of points. The scheme on the left is the current relationship to the house below. So proposed house, existing property. And I've got a photograph of that to show you, Chairman. You can see that it's 19.77 metres away, whereas, and you can't see the 21, the scheme on the right, which was the approved scheme, was 21.77, so it's a metre closer. But I'll go on to show you. That's what you can see at the back of the property. I couldn't get it all on because you see the bush on the left-hand photograph. It didn't allow me to get it into perspective. So what you have is a garage there. So at ground floor, effectively, the proposed house won't have an impact on anything behind that garage. It won't have an impact, in my view, on the ground floor window. You can see in the right-hand photograph that the issue is whether it will have an impact on that top window. The view we've taken is it's and you've got a footpath in between as well. It is below the threshold, but it's looking up. It's a small window. It's at an angle. You're not going to see a great deal in there, and genuinely can't see a planning inspector saying that is a privacy problem. And you are allowed to reduce the 21 metres when there are extenuating circumstances or changes to angles. It was slightly less on the approved scheme, but not much. Then we go to the other issue, which is that of, I've got to these slides here. It's the third row from the top. Was the initial scheme they put forward for the section of the site facing the road, the one that would be a little bit more prominent. And that was considered to be uniform and mundane, and our conservation consultants wanted a different form of scheme. So they came up with what is the top row. Okay, it incorporated coping stones, more thicker mullioned windows, or the jamb, should I say, not the mullions, in there. A bit of variation in height, and Growth Lancashire were content with that revised scheme. The render you can see is to the rear. That's not really going to be seen from public vantage points. It will be around a car parking court, so I've no particular issues with that. The two rendered gables you see will be located here, and you won't see those. That won't have an impact, so it is saving money, I would have thought, from the developer's perspective, but that's one of the main impacts. And if we look at, that was the approved scheme at appeal. So you can see there some coping stones on a couple of the properties, but again, the roof pitches which were staggered. I would say the more interesting bit's the central section. The other two houses on the outside were
you just
One
went
of
back
Chris, can you?
a couple of times, but yeah. So that's,
So the top one is what you'd see from the road.
yeah. And the next one is what was originally approved.
That was what was approved. So sorry, if,
Yeah, so the gear blend is now proposed to be.
I don't think I've... Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and, comments made, obviously when you look at the context it's in, the inspector does comment on that. These are the, I think some of the concerns were that it's a very uniform area and it's a very historic area, which it is to a degree, but you kind of come out of that. The site is, as you can see on the, on the photograph to the left, this is the site itself. You can see, you know, more modern properties there, and then the photograph to the right, you can see the next to the tree here. That's a property I've just showed you photographs of with the garage there. So you do have a change in context. There is a more modern approach to the site when you get right next to it. Chairman, I think that's as much as I want to say.
Neil, which street is that? The one on the right hand side that's turning up?
I don't know what street it is.
I'm just trying to
Lupton Drive.
Lupton Drive, yeah. So that went up to where the larger housing estate
I'm just
was.
trying to find it on mine.
Yeah.
The more historic ones are on the left-hand side, aren't
Yeah.
Councillor Witt, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The original application was approved on appeal, and there were comments from the inspector in terms of the design and its interaction with heritage. And the relevant issue is the proximity to the conservation area. Now, I've looked carefully at the plans, and I don't see that there is any significant detriment comparing the approved plans to the scheme that's been put in as a variation. So I think in the report it refers to referred to this committee because of the significant risk of costs, and I think that is a significant risk because the impact on the conservation area is not sufficient to warrant a refusal to these new plans. Little concerned about the juxtaposition of the change in location and the 1 metre reduction in the distance to the existing house there. But I'd need convincing that that is sufficient to justify a refusal. So on that basis, Chairman, I would move that we approve the revised plans.
Is that it? Yeah, Councillor Witt, sorry.
Yeah.
Councillor Yasser.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, if I may, Chair, to Neil. In the brief introduction he gave, in respect of, I'm going to focus more on the rejection, the reasons for refusal in the pink sheet, because I've not heard anything else thus far. That might change depending on what the colleagues want to put forward as a new objection. One of them it was that plot 1 being closer than 21 metres, and Neil referred to, that is the threshold, isn't it? I think is that 21 metre the threshold?
There's a 21 metre threshold in the design guide that we've adopted, yes.
Okay, and I think you said that there can be circumstances where there is a change or extenuating circumstances. Have they given any reasons for the change or extenuating circumstances as to why? I know it's only a metre, but if there's any reason why that has changed, and have they given any reasons? Have we asked for reasons?
Haven't asked for reasons. It is just what their designers have come up with, and obviously they've submitted that for us to assess. So no specific reason why it's changed, but it is part of their overall design changes.
Okay, and if that is, and I know these things are with planning quite strict in terms of the legislation and what the rules are, is it up for them to impress upon us what the extenuating circumstances are, or can we look at it as a whole as a committee and say actually these might be the extenuating circumstances?
You as a committee, you need to decide on what's material or not, and what as a committee you think could be substantiated on appeal, and what is acceptable or not. When you get a plan application, like any application, it's up to us and yourselves to actually assess that and make an assessment based on the actual impacts. I've had a look at it today. The window is small, it's concealed, it's an angle. When I say concealed, it's recessed quite deeply. Looking across from there, you're not going to be able to see a great deal in there. Okay. And the ground floor one, there's a garage in between. So it is just that central one. It is below the threshold, but the views into it are going to be minuscule.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, for what it's worth, I don't think the slight change in the length below the 21 metres, for me personally, I don't think it's a significant departure. I was just interested in whether they had explained that reason and whether we had explored why that was. I mean, for what it's worth, I'm not sure it's a significant issue for me personally, but we've been at committees like these before where we have literally argued over a metre and how that causes an impact, so I just want to clarify that point. Secondly, in respect of the other reason, it says an impact on heritage and the additional less substantial harm. Now, as Councillor Whip has already said, this has been to appeal. How strong of a ground is that? From my experience and perspective, I can't see that at this stage that can be upheld if we refuse on that basis. How strong, in your professional opinion, is that as a ground to refuse?
Weak. Hence, obviously, why it's been referred here. When you read the inspector's decision, I've reread it again this evening. He refers to some of the modern context it's in. He refers to the shrubbery and the planting that will go in between this and the road, and he refers to benefits that, you know, you've got to weigh the benefits. Even if there's some harm to it, you've got to weigh the benefits, and that's what the inspector concluded, that the benefits would outweigh any disbenefits. I think here the changes in design from the original, yes, I think was poor. They've got it a lot better using traditional stone and slate, and it's going to be difficult to argue, in my view, particularly when the professional consultants we hire have said that it's, you know, in their view, it doesn't harm the conservation area. And in fact, I think it's going to be a very difficult case to take to appeal.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I think that was my kind of initial thought, really, because we have, in previous committees of this Development Management Committee, refused on that basis on the first initial stage. But I think that that was my initial kind of thought, that at this stage, having refused initially, then gone to appeal, and that would be perhaps a weak ground. And similarly, I think that, as I've already suggested, that the first ground was, although it's technically slightly lower than the threshold, that perhaps won't be the strongest. So in those circumstances, Chair, and in the absence of getting any other compelling arguments from any other councillor, now I may be convinced the other way at some stage, but at this stage I'd happily second Councillor Whip's motion to approve this application.
Chairman, may I just say one more point as well. We argued partly successfully, on the Windermere Avenue appeals about the setting of the conservation area, that it was important in the environs, the inspector specifically refers to that in his decision notice and says the fields beyond don't contribute. So even that as an argument would be really difficult to run, whereas we ran it successfully on the Windermere Avenue appeal.
Thank you. Councillor Stone, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have at this stage, I have got some comments to make about this, but I have got one specific query, if I could first, which is around the change to the material. So the rear elevations of the plots along the frontage and the side and rear elevations of plots 69 and 70 would be finished in a cream render. Now, what I wanted to understand is, because this is a change in the variation application, isn't it? And this render is rather ugly, in my view. Now, in the officer's report, it says, taking into account that the rendered rear elevations would not be visible from the conservation area. My question is this: Are those cream renders inside the conservation area?
No.
They're not?
No.
Okay. And are they visible from the conservation area? You say no. Is that correct?
I'm saying that the two gables, you may see it slightly from there, but they are close gables. It's not going to draw the eye to it, particularly as it's set back. And the rest of them won't be, the rear won't be seen from the conservation area, because it's seen from outside of it on the rest of the housing estate.
But the side gables could be.
Well, I don't think so, looking at the gap there, and it is, you'd have to see them in that gap. Those gables there and there are stone, as are these. For all the other properties, it is that elevation, those two elevations within that gap that are proposed to be rendered. You've got to remember, Chairman, stone and render is a commonly used mix throughout the country. It's not an unusual situation to have stone and render.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask one more question as well? So and that relates to this this breach of the design principle SPD around the distance. Now, the original application, plot 1 was 21.9 metres from Oaklands Lodge. In the revised application, it's 19.77, so that's a significant, that's a 2.1 metre change, which is quite significant. And I am not comfortable, I don't understand why that change has been necessary, or why, because it is more than 1 metre, it's more than double that. So I don't understand why we would be happy with that breach of our own design code.
So the design code does say that you can reduce distances if angles and there are level changes, etc. And I'm quite clear. And you look at the nature of the window as well. So if it was square on, nothing intervening, and it was a large window, I think I would be saying something different to you, but it isn't. It's a small window. It's so big, you have, from an angle, you'd hardly be able to see into the room. It's not going to expose anyone from there. It's set in, so that has an impact of reducing what you can see. And as I said, it's set at an angle, so I can't see any inspector. I never know with inspectors, but I would doubt any inspector is going to say that that's a loss of privacy. And the ground floor, I just don't think is, having visited today, we can see the angle. You'd have to see over the garage into that room. Plus, that room, this other room, which you can see here, you'd be seeing it from that angle. So you may have a lamp or something in the corner, but the opportunity to see in there over a garage from, well, I think that's 21 metres anyway, because it's further away, is not something that I think would take away anyone's privacy.
Thank you.
Councillor Sutcliffe.
Thank you, Chair. I feel bugged by this application because there's a lot of, there are a few positives in it about the reducing the number of units on site is obviously great because it's going to be better for the local area, local residents to have less people to and froing within the site. And the increased number of house types makes it feel more organic, as it says in the report. The layout and house types make it feel better. A couple of questions. There's comments here about the removal of, on the northeast of the site onto lane, of the pedestrian link. Has that been removed? So I can't see where that is on the map.
I looked at the pedestrian links and they're all at the front, and they have there's some reorganisation of them and rationalisation, but effectively the link is through the site, so that link hasn't gone as far as
because it is
pedestrian flows
mentioned,
through.
and I would object to that, mainly because Church Street is so busy and it's got a narrow footpath on one side of the street. The pedestrian access and links to the rest of the area become more and more important because you wouldn't want to walk directly out into Church Street because of how narrow it is and the traffic. So I think that's an important thing to clarify. And then also, I just wanted to ask about how we condition, or will it be conditioned that the 1 metre for visibility for the driveways will be included as part of this?
Yeah.
So it is. Okay. So then, when we move on to the frontage onto Church Street and the comments from the planning inspector, and the appeal decision specifically mentions, and it says, and include mullioned windows, but in the conservation consultant's comments, there's no reference to that whatsoever. And I thought that because it's a specific comment from the planning, the appeal decision, that it would be made reference to within the consultant's comments.
I can't speak to the Consultants Council, obviously it's from there, but they did, and that's one of the points the inspector made about the mullion windows, and that is a lesser design quality, shall we say, but it doesn't mean to say that what is being proposed is not acceptable. But yes, having thicker mullions, stone mullions in there is as you can see, opposite. You have those.
And that's why I come back to my first comment. It annoys me because it would have been so simple to keep something like that in and make it much better. And it's just a simple thing. I mean, it's obviously just done to save money in terms of the facade. And I feel like as Martin said about the distance for that one property, why reduce it? If they'd have kept it where it was, we would have been happy with that. If they'd have kept the mullions in the windows, I'd have been happy with that. These are just tiny little things that actually, it's almost like, why did you bother doing that? I share Martin's concern about that render, but if you're satisfied that it can't be seen, then I will agree with it. It does look a small gap between those properties, and so I agree. But that frontage and the fact that it specifically says mullion windows within the appeal decision, I am disappointed that the conservation officer hasn't made reference to that, or the conservation consultant hasn't made reference to that, because I think that design in terms of materials is one thing, but that's a specific design feature of those elevations which is missing from that property that is mentioned.
I accept that, Chairman, but it is a different design as well. They're not going for the same solution here. Otherwise, they clearly would have gone for this as a design. It is different in character. You have, I think, the central plots, 39 to 42, 35, 38, look good, but then I think the simplicity of what's proposed here on the end plots actually simplifies and provides a better solution. That, to me, on the approved scheme was more like a modern housing estate development for plots 34 and 43. So I think there are some swings and some roundabouts in it.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other councillors? Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Ash's comments. This is an irritating application of variation because it could have been so much better. There's some things in here which we've talked about, the impact of plot 1 on Oaklands Lodge, the mullioned windows, which are troubling. Members might recall the history of this application because the original application was rejected, and it was rejected primarily because of two main issues. The highways issue. Church Street is extremely narrow, and it is not designed. It is struggling with the volume of traffic. The pavements are narrow, which means pedestrians walking their children or walking anywhere sometimes have to go out into the highway, which itself is narrow and only effectively one car wide. And it was unfortunate that the highways in the original application saw no issue with access. That was an inexplicable mistake to me, but we can't sadly consider that in the context of this variation. The second main area, and lots of residents wrote some very, very good, well-argued letters of objection to this application, both the original one and the variation. The second main area of concern is the impact on the conservation area. I won't mention the other impacts in terms of biodiversity, wildlife and so on, but the impact on the conservation area. Now, in the appeal decision acknowledges, as members know, that this application causes what they describe as less than substantial harm to the conservation area. But the appeal decision justified the application on the basis of economic benefit. Now, I and other members have to make a judgment. The impact on the conservation area is naturally subjective. Equally, trying to assess the economic good delivered by building 75 new houses in an already overbuilt village, again, members have to make their own judgment call. But I never accepted that in the first application that there was a less than substantial harm to the conservation area. I made a different calculation. That's why I voted against it then. And sadly, Chair, I still reject this application. I can't vote for this for the simple reasons that I've outlined. However, in terms of the variation itself, which is all we can consider, I know, I struggle to get over the breach of the design principles. Why move plot 1 2 metres closer to Oakland's Lodge? It doesn't need to be like that. It is surely possible within the remit of the developer to design something which does not breach that code. And the cream render, I think, yes, that has, for me, that has an impact on the conservation area, an additional detrimental impact on the conservation area. And for those two very specific reasons that relate to the variation, and those are reasons, I think, which are valid in terms of coming to a conclusion on this particular variation. For those two reasons, I will vote against this application variation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLeod.
I was just wondering, as Martin and others have spoke there, whether we could ask Neil to, I don't know whether it'd be open for delegate approval if they would shift it back up the 2.1 metres to where it was. I agree with comments that it isn't going to make the hugest of impacts to the residents, but why have a policy that we allow developers to deviate from without any justification? Looking at the drawings, without getting my ruler out, plot number 12 at the top of the row there seems to be at least within the boundary of the land that McDermott owned there, at least, I'm going to have a guess, 8 to 10 metres of spare land there, which I presume will be mowed and kept tidy. I don't understand why they've moved it down instead of leaving it as it was, as others have mentioned. It's just really frustrating that we have some rules that we want developers to abide by, albeit they can be swerved under exceptional circumstances, as Yasser asked for. What were those? And I just don't see why we would be allowing them to be swerved when there's sufficient space to move the entirety of 1 to 12 up the 2.1 metres and be satisfied with our own policy. I'm looking at the relationship between the plots on 1 to 12 and those opposite, and I can't imagine, I'm not an engineer, but I can't imagine that it's anything to do with the drains or additional costs there with lining them up with one. I have no idea, but there just seems to be ample room to shift everything up. So that I don't know why, but it makes sense to me, rather than breach our own policy and allow it to be breached, as Yasser said, for no exceptional circumstance, that we delegate approval to Neil, with them shifting it back up 2.1 metres. So I'll table that.
Would you like to move that then, or?
Yes, sorry, yeah, just for the formality, I'll move that we delegate approval with the 2.1 metre rule back in place. There's no good reason for them not to have done that. But I would also ask Neil, what would the implication that if they said no?
Well, through you, Chairman, you'd have to give me an instruction what you wanted to do.
If they said no.
If they said no. And I can't give you any more clear advice. You've been stung for costs once, you'll get stung for costs again. It won't fly. The angle and you see the nature of the window.
No, I did say when I opened it, I understand it's not got the greatest of impacts, but as others have commented, I don't see the exceptional circumstances when they're not trying to squeeze plot 13 onto the end of the row there. They've kept 1 to 12, but seem to have just moved it down. All I'm saying is move it back, and that's one half of the two issues and objections dealt with.
Johnny, if I look at it another way, the 21 metres is there. If face to face, you're seeing straight into somebody, that's really straightforward. It's there for a really good reason, to stop people. And I live in a modern house, and we're at 21 metres, and that's, it's can be too close in some ways. But you've got to, when we're looking at this, and I looked at this today on site and said, what actually will you see?
I understand that entirely. Ash and I drove past it on the way here as well. We visited both the application sites. Totally agree with you. The point I'm raising is that we have a set of rules that we're asking developers to abide by, and for no reason that any of us can seem to fathom, when there's ample land at the top of number 12, why have they shifted it down, shift it back up again, and won't be happy? It's reasonable. It's one half of the appeals reason and the paper dealt with. I don't see any exceptional circumstances. I agree with you that it's not going to cause the biggest difference in the world, but why would we permit? Is that a word? Why would we allow the rules to be breached for no good reason? Just get them to shift it back up 2 metres. But then I take the point that I don't want to be in breach of costs. So
I'm in your hands.
have we asked them? I think you said no earlier.
Laura did ask me. Alex, sorry.
Should we move it back onto?
Well, you wanted to come in.
I wanted to ask another question of clarification, if I could, because the original appeal decision was based on a balance of good versus harm. It accepted the harm to the conservation area, but in the inspector's judgment at that time, he felt that the economic benefits outweighed that harm. Now, my question is, and it's probably a question for Neil, is that a dynamic situation in the sense that the inspector may have made that judgment at that time, however, if this application was to be rejected and it went back for appeal, presumably, would the inspector make a renewed assessment based on, changes to economic situation and house sales and that kind of thing, in terms of the supposed economic benefit of building more houses, and also taking into account the having another think about the impact on the conservation area. So would it be a renewed balance assessment, or would it basically be, well, okay, that was my original and not much has changed, so...
Through you, Chairman, the inspector will have to make another assessment of it. But what he did at the time was saying, well, you have a 5-year supply of land, so if you've got a 3-year, he will give a lot more weight to that. You have a 5-year supply of land, so you've built enough houses in accordance with national policy so far. So he wasn't giving it more weight than perhaps he would have done in an undersupply situation. And he says, in any event, the proposed development would also result in economic benefits. So he's saying, I think it's okay anyway, just about, but in any event, there are economic benefits. That economic benefit won't change, I don't think. He's not going to look at building costs, etc. It will be, they'll accept the supply chain, they'll accept that it's the number of houses. Number of houses does weigh in inspectors' minds. We've had appeals where they've said it's just one house, it's not going to make a great deal, but 75, it's going to make a big, if you're looking at 2 houses for a job, 20 odd jobs, they'll give quite substantial weight to that. So they will have to reassess it, but I don't think it's going to fundamentally shift the balance.
Councillor Yasser, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think I do have some sympathy with the points made by Councillor Stone and McGladrey and the other colleagues that have spoken. And I hope it was evident that in my earlier discussion, and the inference was that I did have some reluctance about the fact that there is a policy, as Councillor Stone has said, and that we have a policy for a reason. There's a design principle, and this developer, for no apparent reason in my view, when one considers that actually they've reduced it, I think, was it 2 plots? Was it 2? 4. Again, what is the reason? If anything, it may have been that they could have made a slightly longer distance than the 21 metres, and so that there isn't any significant impact on Oaklands Lodge. So I think that is definitely an issue which I was conscious of, and the lack of reason in the report and in their comments, again, is, in my view, perhaps concerning is a strong word, but certainly it would have been useful if we had that. But ultimately, what we come down to is this, is that do we really want to roll the dice, even on Councillor McGladrey's suggestion of a grant consent, and then potentially they can say, well, actually we're not happy with this. I'm not sure if it's been moved or seconded. It hasn't, but I'd personally be against that, only because of what the repercussions could be, not because of what the suggestion is and what the principle and the kind of the thinking behind it is. I actually agree with what both Councillor Stone and what Councillor McGladrey have suggested, and the concern they've raised. I think it's a valid concern, because we've been here, have we not, where, as I've said in my earlier remarks, where we have literally fallen out, maybe that's a strong word as well, had a discussion with the planning officers about why there should be extenuating circumstances, and these are cases where actually the applicant or the agent has come and given extenuating circumstances. Here, the developer is not even here, which is sad to note, really. If they were that concerned, it is a significant application, and obviously this application, as Councillor Stone said, has history. It's been at this committee on various occasions. So that was the reason for my question, really, as to what the thinking was of the council, that we have a policy, we have guidelines, and we are, in essence, allowing them to deviate from them guidelines. And I appreciate the comments that that you made, Neil, in respect of how it's a narrow window and actually it's not a significant impact. But I think that and that might be the case. I've tried to go on Google Maps and I've looked and I can't see that particular side when I'm on Google Maps. So I don't have the benefit of actually being on site. That might be the case, and I'm sure that you're right because you've been there. But for me, it's more the principle of the guidelines and the rules that this council have, and how, in my view, they've just been breached in this occasion. Although we are talking a couple of metres at max, but that's not the point. The point for me is that it has been breached. So I will perhaps remind members of this when something like this comes before the committee again. Perhaps remind you in particular, Neil. I know it's not going to be a precedent. So I'm not saying it's a precedent, but I do think that even when we are talking less than a metre, that we should have, or the applicant should have, given us that reason as to why that was. But having said all of that, I still stick to my seconding of Councillor Whip's motion, because we are, of course, the committee which decides on these kind of issues to look at whether there will be substantial risk of costs. And I think I do tend to agree with with Neil on that, in that respect at least, that I think if we were to refuse on either of them grounds or both of them grounds, that there would be a significant risk of costs. And this developer has done it before, and I'd be surprised if they don't do it again. So for that reason, I'd still support the motion I seconded. I don't think there's any other amendment yet, but I wouldn't, even if there was, I wouldn't support that.
Councillor Whip, please.
Yes, Chairman. Am I responding to the debate?
Okay.
Yeah. It's clear that there is a very significant risk of costs if we do not approve this tonight. And I say that very advisedly, because I think there needs to be a clear-cut decision rather than a fudge, which is what Councillor McGladdery is suggesting. I quite understand ward councillors dying in a ditch to resist an application and perhaps clutching at straws as to justifying why they can vote against it. But I think we have to listen to the professional advice that we've been given. And Mr Watson has said on 3 separate times tonight that he can't see a planning inspector agreeing with us. When asked a question, how strong is our case, he said weak, and then later on he said, quote, it won't fly. So it's as plain as a pikestaff that if this ends up at an appeal, then it is going to cost not this council but the residents of Pendle, because councillors couldn't accept that we don't have and I will use my phrase, a leg to stand on in terms of defending a decision to refuse it. Councillor Stone said he can't vote for it. He said he'd never accepted some of the reasons why the planning inspector had done it. Well, fair enough, but it's a done deal. You know, that's water under the bridge, and he went into the highway issues, which I don't disagree, but highway issues are not something that we can take into account in the decision. We're looking at the design, and to my mind, the revised layout in terms of that frontage onto the conservation area is an improvement. You know, I think it looks better than it did before. So, okay, that's subjective, but you know, it's more varied, and you know, it does what it's supposed to do. You know, be a good frontage effect in the setting of a conservation area. The render to the rear, well, that doesn't affect the conservation area at all. Whether you like it or not, it's a perfectly acceptable material, and it's one that has been used all over Pendle, and no doubt will continue to be used in the future. So there really isn't any justification for refusal. The only questionable area, which I said at the outset, you know, if there was a case that would say that reduction in the distance between the lodge and the new development was unacceptable, I was prepared to hear it, but I haven't heard that, and what I've seen is Mr Watson show us the relationship between the proposed development and the existing property, which would not result in any impact on the existing property, to the extent that, you know, it would justify a refusal. So I think that we need to approve this. To do otherwise, it would result in us having a huge risk of costs, and I don't think that's what we should be about. We certainly shouldn't vote for a fudge. I mean, we'll have an application coming back to committee in due course, which was fudged a few months ago, and I think, you know, this committee needs to be quite clear about what its decisions are. We can't wish that the applicants had done something different. The applicants have put in the plans that they've put in, and we have to make a decision as they are submitted.
Is that it, Councillor Whip? Yeah.
Yep.
Councillor McGladrey.
Well, I was, I haven't heard everything that's been said. I think what I heard Martin thus far state that he may vote against the application. I do agree that the risk of costs are too great. I just, without dwelling on the point, well, I have a policy that we don't look to enforce, so I would have moved that we delegate grant consent and ask Neil if there is a technical reason why the 2.1 rule guideline has been breached, and would the applicant reconsider that, and if they won't, then approve it anyway. I think the question should be asked. It doesn't do us any harm to delegate the grant consent. Could that be a case, delegate consent and do it anyway if they said no? I know I'm on camera and they could be watching it, but
Chairman, your hands with that. Clearly the committee can do it if they wish to, but
I don't know how far we've gone in asking the technical reasons why the 2.1 metre rule has been breached, any at all. Or...
I'm not aware we've asked why,
No.
but I haven't specifically discussed that with the case officer, if I'm honest.
No. So if committee was minded to ask you to do so, ask if there is a technical reason and state that we prefer the guidelines were kept to, and if they refuse, then obviously go ahead anyway. Or we're wasting time.
Well, Chairman, if I may just perhaps I haven't
We
articulated
don't have the
this.
questions being asked, do we?
No,
The guidelines.
It's a matter, yeah. Sorry, Neil.
Sorry, Councillor. The guidelines say 21 unless there are different relationships. So it's not a breach if we say actually the relationships mean that 21 can be offset. So it's not a breach. What we're saying is the guidelines actually say you can do that if there's a justification to do it. And my view, without broken record here, is that offsetting the narrow nature of it, the distance, gives that justification to say actually 21 metres isn't the applicable standard here.
Okay. That's quite a different context. I've finished. I've no amendment.
That's fine. Let's move to the vote then, please. As moved by Councillor Whip and seconded by Councillor Yasser, all those for approval? 2, 3, 4. All those against? That's been approved, thank you.
Under the abstentions, Chairman.
Or any abstention then, please?
Okay, 4.
That's fine, thank you. Second application 24/0267/HHO, erection of a front and rear dormer to facilitate a loft conversion and a first floor rear extension at 119 Clayton Street, Nelson. Councillor Sutcliffe.
Thank you, Chairman. I've looked at this as, obviously this came before us previously, and we asked, I can't remember who moved, but we asked the applicant to revisit this. And I think it was Councillor Tennant that said it wasn't so much a dormer as an extra floor on the building, and we completely agreed on that. Yeah. It's no better, and therefore I move refusal.
Any other speakers? Councillor McLeod. Did you put your hand up then, sorry?
I did, yeah, I was having a scratch at the same time. But
Go on.
You caught me mid-scratch. I think it was Councillor Whip that asked for it to go back, and I think my comments at the time were it's so far away from what we would find acceptable. I didn't see the point, but I wasn't against. I didn't vote against that amendment, I don't believe. I think I might have abstained, but as Ash says, it is still so far away from what should be acceptable in the conservation area, in the scheme. Last time we visited, there was some scaffolding going on. I think it's Albert Road down the side. There was a lot of scaffolding up at some local premises, and I was thinking, are they doing a dormer as well? Couldn't have a look on the planning portal. I'll go back and see. They weren't. They were just, I think, doing some capstones or whatever, re-roofing. I'm rambling a bit, but when you look at the corner of Clayton and Albert and the general vicinity, you don't see anything like this. It's quite a nice and tidy, neat street scene in every direction. There's some dormers to the rear of Albert Street there, where this faces the corner, that don't really contribute or detract from the street scene. They are what they are, and this is just. It's a onset. It's an extra floor. It's not an extension. It's not a dormer. It's another layer on top. And I can imagine in a couple of years they'll put another one on top of that.
Probably.
It's and then the resident, as I said, I don't know if members recall at the last meeting, we met the neighbours when we were there, and what residents are like. Sometimes they don't read the papers or they confuse them. But the next door neighbours and the other neighbours came out and. They didn't really fully understand, they didn't understand at all what the proposals were, and this would have just locked them in what was quite a nice and tidy rear yard that they each were washing, and they had a little table out there, and it was quite pleasant for what it was, and this would totally block them in, I don't know if that's a planning reason or it was too late to add that one in, but the point is this is just so far away from what should be acceptable in a conservation area, in that street scene, for that area. This isn't a dormer, front and rear and an extension to the back. This is a whole another floor. They're adding a whole new layer to the house, so I will second Ash's motion to refuse on all those reasons and the articulated ones in the report.
Councillor Whip.
Chairman, I'm going to argue against. It apparently is unacceptable because they're adding another floor. Now, to my mind, that's desirable, because I think that sort of building upwards is better than sprawling outwards. And we've just spent 52 minutes discussing sprawling outwards in Barrowford, and here we have an opportunity to allow somebody to expand upwards and actually make the property more suitable for accommodation in the century that we live in. And I think we need to be looking at the policy. We need to be looking at the policy that says, well, you can't have these dormers. However, the policy is what it is. At the last meeting, we resolved to ask the applicants if they could revise the application to make it more acceptable in terms of residential amenity and the design. And I think in terms of residential amenity, they have addressed that. The design is an improvement on what there was before, and I think that you know, as a committee, we ought to be allowing the applications which are coming to us, which are all about making those old tourist properties more appropriate for modern living, and I think this is one of those applications. So I would support it being approved.
Councillor Yasser.
Can I
Oh,
just
sorry,
say,
sorry.
it's not original.
Councillor Yasser.
I don't know whether Neil picked up on that.
So I was too busy writing.
Chair, I'm not sure if this was the last committee or the one before that, because I've missed two now, I think, on the trot. So I'm not familiar with it in particular. Are there any of the plans there? Because that to me looks, yeah. Is that the only two?
There's that's the
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's
cross
one.
section.
So I'm just trying to look on Google Maps as well, and there's quite dated pictures, one in 2018, and there is a dormer, I think, a couple of houses next door. Certainly was in 2018.
Not like this one.
Well, not like this
On the
one.
back. Yeah,
the back, yeah.
small. That's,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
all that's there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not very sightly even in 2018. I'm not sure if anything's been done to it. But obviously, as Councillor Whipper said, that they've addressed some of the amenity issues, and it comes down to that design. And we've just discussed in the previous application that design is subjective, and of course it's subjective. I remind myself of a meeting we had some years back, and it was a meeting where Whitefield Conservation Area was discussed, and Councillor Witt made a remark which always stuck with me, that if we don't let people build on it, it will no longer conservation area, no one will be living in the damn place. And that is, I think, sums it up quite nicely actually, that there is a conservation area, and obviously we have to abide by the rules and the policy, and whether we feel that has to change, and I personally feel that we need to look at that policy again. Perhaps it's for the ward councillors to consider at some stage, or the executive. I'm not sure how that's done, but certainly I think it needs to be looked at. But we do live in the real world here. We have policies, we have guidelines, and we have to, when one looks at it from the real world perspective, this is a person who wants to build up. And in today's world, if this person wants to go get a house somewhere else, firstly it might not be financially possible. I know that personal circumstances aren't something that we need to consider, and I'm not saying that that's the reason why I'm approving it. Perhaps I've given my thoughts away there. I'll second Councillor Whip's motion to approve, but I think that this is something which needs to be looked at by this committee, and having, or by this council, having looked at now then the 4 or 5 images that Neil's displayed on the screen behind you, Chair, I think that in the circumstances I can't see an issue why this application should be refused, and I would suggest that this committee should approve this application. The applicant has addressed some of the concerns. It may be that design is one thing, but I don't see personally an issue with it. I would therefore second Councillor Whip's motion to approve.
Councillor Strickland, please.
Thanks. I think it's just a question for Neil, really, just to try and put some content on it. The application is for 2 new bedrooms and a bathroom. In terms of size, what are the new sizes? What are they in proportion to the old existing bedrooms? Are they similar or are they much bigger?
Again, I haven't actually calculated that, but there's only so much you can get into those properties. They're going to be similar.
And that's my thought process. And I take on board what other colleagues are saying around massive builds. But they're really within confines of existing sizes bedrooms. They're only just additioning 2 more. And exactly what Councillor Witt and Yes has said, if we don't develop these existing properties, then what we're going to do, we're going to spend hours and hours discussing new builds on areas that we don't want to build in. So I just wanted to see if there were any sort of massive variances in size of bedrooms.
Is that it? Yeah, Councillor Strickland, sorry. Councillor, you want?
Yeah, just to make it clear, I have absolutely no problem with dormers in general, and I appreciate the fact that people need to move up, move out a bit within reason. But as Councillor Sutcliffe brought up when we went to actually go and see this, I comment, this isn't a dormer, it's an extra floor. Basically turned it into a short tower block. So I wouldn't purely, I mean, my thing is purely for the impact on the neighbours. But I don't think we can use that as an objection. But it's not what they're saying it is. Let's say it that way. It's not a dormer. It's a building a tower block.
Which comes first? Councillor Sutcliffe.
So there are two things that are really important here. I'm not against dormers, and I agree with it. You know, Yvonne just said the same thing. It's not about the development. Now, this property, because it is so prominent on the end of the block, the design of it is quite important, and it stands out more than any others. So the design just doesn't work in the way that it's developed. It doesn't look like a dormer, it looks like an extra floor, and that's the difference, because it then upsets the entire block. It upsets the whole terrace. But then you add on to that it's in a conservation area as well. Now, I'd object to that design if it wasn't in a conservation area in the way that it's prominent on the end of the block. Add into the fact that it is a conservation area, and we are trying to protect the identity of these terraced houses that we built for millworks and all of that goes with it. That is important in the context of our area. That's the reason we're doing investigations into the history of textile and future of textile mills. You know, it all sits within the context, and that's why it's a conservation area. You know, what's the point of having it if we're not having the conservation areas, if we're not going to respect that? So that's really important. But I would, as I've already said, I would still be against this if it wasn't in a conservation area, because it's not really. It's too obvious, or it's like a carbuncle on the property because of the way that it sits in such a prominent position on the end of the block.
Councillor McGladra.
Yeah, just to add weight to the comments that have been made. I don't agree with the notion that we should cast aside all our desires for any area, as I said, conservation area or not, just to allow people to build upwards. I think we should respect the street scene and the aesthetics of what we have. I understand what Mick said. We don't want people to build on green land and new houses, but also I live in a new build. Quite embarrassing to a bit at times when I'm preaching to protect green spaces, but we do need more housing in the borough, and I don't think the solution is cramming as many people into the square feet footprint that you've got in the house by building up, move onwards, and perhaps is the best bet in some circumstances. This just totally interrupts the whole street scene, and that is the main frustration. I'm not particularly against dormers. I'm not particularly for them. I'm neutral. I'll go to the site visits or look on Google Maps and I try to assess it the best I can. This isn't, as Ivan says, just a dormer. It totally interrupts and ruins the aesthetics of the area, and it's much more than what the drawings on the screen can show you if you stood there looking at it. You understand the impact it will have visually and for the neighbours. So I agree with everything in the reports. Interestingly, Chairman shared the views of I think a resident. I'm not sure who that person was. And they cited 3 recent examples, and I haven't delved into them, but there were 3 examples there of what I would take to be equivalent applications that were turned down. I used to work in Bradford in one of my last jobs, and quite jokingly, I don't know if Ash and these guys will remember, a couple of months ago I was spotted at some traffic lights, there some roadworks, and I looked down a street scene, and every other house was a dormer of a different design and different building, do you remember? Different building materials. It was near the 5 lane junctions in Bradford, and I took a picture and sent it and sort of flippantly said, do you know where I am? And everybody knew I was in Bradford because they just didn't seem to care. It was awful. The street scene was absolutely shocking. It looked terrible. And by starting to allow applications such as this, it opens up the 3 applications that I'm going to take on merit from the resident that wrote in that were refused. Perhaps they could come back. But also it allows other residents to do that. Do we want a dot and dash approach where everybody can just do what they want done, what is? Again, I've said this before, I didn't think I'd ever appreciate these things before becoming a member of the council. It's quite a pleasant backdrop, it's quite a nice street scene, it's nice to look down and, as Ash said, appreciate the aesthetics of the old mill houses. And I'm not picking on Bradford, but I'll share this, I've got more time, I'll share the picture that I took. It was absolutely horrendous to look down some of the streets that I was stuck on that day. And I don't want that for Pendle. And the residents clearly, when we were talking to us, didn't want it on Albert Street or Clayton Street either. The ones that gathered to come and speak to us were quite upset about it. So I'm rambling, but I support the motion to refuse because of all those reasons. It's just wrong for the area, and the design is quite shocking.
Councillor Stone, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to pick up a couple of points. Councillor Strickland made a comment that if we don't build in conservation area, we'll be building in green fields, and if we don't extend upwards, likewise we'll be sprawling outwards. The new government have made it very clear the target is for new houses. It makes no difference whatsoever whether we expand upwards. Those targets will still be mandated and we will still have to meet them. Yasser, I normally agree with Yasser about things, well, sometimes anyway. I think you made a comment about, we could end up with a conservation area where nobody lives in it. But surely the whole ethos of a conservation area is still overridden with that sustainable development, and that remains a guiding principle. So I wondered, my question is, Neil, you made some comments about the impact on the character, impact on the conservation area. You've assessed it as harm but less than substantial. But there is there's no counterbalancing benefit in this case, is your view. I wondered if I really wanted to understand, because Whitefield Conservation Area is somewhat unusual. We don't have all that many conservation areas around. Certainly not
25.
Well, certainly not of the type of Whitefield. And I wondered if you could perhaps explain to me why you feel, how you judge that impact on the Whitefield Conservation Area from this application.
Thank you, Chairman. I go back to when there was I think I'd just started here when the public inquiry had ended and they were looking at mass demolitions in Whitefield. Mr. Barnes driving through the area with a bulldozer. The ex-chief executive was, I can remember being quoted to me at the time. And what the Secretary of State's inspector said was it was a uniformity of Whitefield that gives it its character. That it wasn't the intrinsic value of any properties, it was a uniqueness, a uniformity, the streetscape, the urban grain and the uniformity of the roofscape. So if you start to erode that, it erodes one of the elements that Whitefield has been designated for, which was its the way that it grew up and its uniformity. So when you have designs which, I mean, people say design subjective. It is to some degree, but others you have proportions and window and scale and materials and angles, etc. So there's a geometric thing about designs. This is, in any rationalisation I can make in my mind, a poor design. I do understand the points about allowing people to live there. I understand that. I don't take that on board in my recommendations to you because it's personal circumstances and I've got to give you advice in terms of what the courts would say. But it is, and Councillor Sutcliffe said, it's on the end, it's going to be prominent. I think my mum would say it would stick out like a sore thumb. It's not something that's not going to be very visible, and that will impact on the whole street scene. And that is, when you look at the whole conservation area, it's not going to be significant in its whole context, but in that particular portion of it, it will be.
Thank you, and that's very helpful because this is the equivalent in other conservation areas of ripping heritage buildings or loads of trees down. It's in that sense it is striking at the heart of one of the key reasons that Whitefield was given conservation area status. And can I also just another quick question, Chair, if I could perhaps for Neil. If this were to be approved in Whitefield Conservation Area, would that set a precedent that could prejudice our approach to other applications?
Thank you, Chairman. We are in a planning system which has precedents, so it is a precedent based, not like the European Court, which isn't bound by any previous decision. It is, so the simple answer to that is yes, and it will be, and if I were an agent, I would be coming back each time to say, yes, you've already allowed that to go through.
Thank you.
Councillor Whip.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think there are parallel arguments here. There's a set of arguments that say that the conservation area is sacrosanct. We should preserve it in aspect. We should keep cloth cap and clogs alive. And then there's the argument that I'm articulated is that we ought to be allowing, perhaps even encouraging, organic development. That sort of use and reuse of existing properties in order to facilitate the continued life of an area, and the point's been made that the loss of people from the area, in other words, vote with the feet and move out, doesn't help to conserve anything. It actually jeopardises the future, and you see that with some listed buildings where they're impossible to look after, or people choose not to look after them, but they just get neglected. May be listed, may have all that heritage status associated with them, but the key to keeping things, to actually conserving things, is to have those things used and useful. And if we want useful dwellings, we've got to accept that we cannot keep things preserved in aspect and have continue to appreciate the aesthetics of old mill houses and you know, sort of have the street scene sacrosanct above all else. So I think, Chairman, it is a parallel argument. There's no meeting in here, and you know, as I say, we ought to be looking at revising, not this committee because it's a council decision, but as a council we ought to be looking at revising the policy so that we are not forever beholden to those aesthetics, those designs, which you know, quite legitimately prevail in some people's minds. I'd rather be in favour of having houses occupied, a thriving area where people can live and continue to live in future.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
Just a
Councillor
final
Suckley.
comment, please, Chairman. At no point have I ever said that conservation areas should be held in aspic or kept in aspic, and I don't agree with Councillor Wood's viewpoint on the development in conservation areas. Neil will correct me if I'm wrong, but we already have a system where people can develop their properties upwards. They already can add dormants to their properties under permitted development rights when they are on the rear of a property in the correct place, with it, and they're not on the ends of terraces. And I think that's the point here. That it's not about the dormer. It's not about being anti-development. It's not about not developing in a conservation area or developing upwards. It's about these very specific set of circumstances where this property happens to be on the end of a terrace in a conservation area, and those things are at odds with this development and this design. We gave the applicant an opportunity to go back and redesign or reconfigure the design to something which would be less harmful on the conservation area and less prominent within that street setting. They haven't done that, and that was the point that I made right at the beginning. There wasn't an improvement, in my opinion, from the minor changes that I can see from the last application, and therefore I stand by everything I've already said, and yeah, I'm against this.
Councillor McGladdery.
Sorry,
Yeah, the hand.
I like to have the last word today, apparently. Perhaps a bit of coming again, yes, no, I just, you know, David, Council Whip's quite right. We're obviously not going to agree on the viewpoint here, but I think my last comment will be, I don't buy the viewpoint that if we don't allow this type of development, it will become a barren space, because it won't. People need, I don't know, people need 2-bedroom houses all around the country and in every town. Like in Easter and we had one behind William Street, we then moved on to a 3-bed and then a 4-bed, and you know, people move onwards and sometimes upwards. But I don't buy that viewpoint that the conservation area or any lack of allowing dormers will mean a less vibrant, thriving neighbourhood. I think residents move on, as I have done and most people do. You start off with a small house and you go bigger. That's the aim in a lot of people's lives. Some people aren't as materialistic as me. But I just don't buy that argument whatsoever, not for 1 second, that not allowing this type of development will detriment the development of the neighbourhood. It just doesn't make any sense, onwards and upwards. So yeah, I'm against allowing this one. So I think we move to the vote, perhaps.
Move to the vote.
Oh, what was first? Sorry.
Chicken or egg?
I think it was the refusal.
It was
wasn't it?
refusal first, so we take
Refusal.
approval first, the amendment.
The amendment was
David
Councillor
Whip,
Whip's,
yeah.
or Councillor Yass's.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's vote on the approval, which was moved by Councillor Whip and seconded by Councillor Yasser. All those for approval? All those against approval? So that's been. Do we have to take a vote on the refusal as well?
It's just yeah. Which that becomes then, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's straightforward approval, refuse, so it's
Fine.
been lost.
That's been refused now, isn't it?
Refused.
Yeah, perfect, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Should we not take a vote on the refuse?
No,
Is that
I
right?
said it's been refused, that's it, yeah.
Straightforward.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's been refused, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
No. I didn't want to have to come back with